As preparation for the 7th general election since Nigeria's return of democracy in 1999 reaches its crescendo, stakeholders are worried over some factors that may affect the February and March elections. There are fears that if not properly addressed, the crisis, including insecurity as well as fuel and Naira scarcity, may negatively impact the voter turnout and disrupt the elections. The Naira redesign policy introduced by the CBN has raised dust. However, many Nigerians currently have hard times withdrawing cash from automated teller machines and inside banking halls amid the deadline given by the central bank to phase out the old notes. Nigerians have expressed various opinions that the timing of the policy is wrong with regards to the forthcoming elections. And joining us to discuss election preparations, Naira scarcity, among others, we have Moshood Isa, who is the communication officer at Yaga Africa, and Emmanuel Njoku, who is also the director of democracy and governance at Connected Development Code. Welcome to the program, gentlemen.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, so let me start with you, Mr. Emmanuel. You know, we've been seeing the back and forth going on between the, APC, the PDP, governors, central bank, and, everybody in the system right now, projecting that all of this is just going to impact the election. But the question now, thank God we have people from the civil society, is this impact going to be positive or negative?
Well, I will say it will be both positive and negative. It will be positive in the sense that we're aware that our electoral process has been commercialized. I mean, we saw what happened at the primaries. You are aware the level of vote buy-in that was witnessed in Ekiti State governorship election, also in Osun State governorship election. And so this policy, for one, we know will tackle the issue of vote buy-in and the issue of the whole commercialization of the whole process, voter inducement and all of that. But beyond that, I have a feeling it will also impact on the voter turnout. This is the negative side of it. I know a lot of people who typically would travel to their places of where they register to vote, to go and vote, who are not able to access cash to travel. And so when you are traveling, I had in your earlier session when you're talking about how you have to pay transporters 500, 1,000, 2,000. A lot of people can now access this money to be able to travel to vote. That's an issue. Again, secondarily, I also feel why this policy will tackle vote buy-in. But then this policy is also creating so much scarcity and so much lack that citizens may also become vulnerable to vote buy-in, no matter how small. So when there is so much scarcity, it means that if the citizens in these very rural poor communities see even 1,000 Naira, there is a tendency that they will even sell their votes.
Exactly. Now, Moshood, I was going to ask that question because earlier during the newspaper review, Nuruddin Abdullah, in his submission, said he has seen situations, not told, seen situations where things as little as a bar of soap, a pack of salt, are used to induce voters. So in this situation where the Naira has become so scarce that it is becoming a privilege for you to have access to it, do you think the policy will address the issues that it is claiming to address, so much so that it might even influence it such that at the end of the day we have people who are even willing to collect way less this time just because the access to cash has become even more important than voting on election day?
Yeah, interestingly, this morning I saw a social media post. Someone said the federal government is burning the entire bush because they want to kill 2 or 3 rats.
Wow.
Meaning we are impacting on the over 200 million Nigerians because we claim we want to address vote buying. But we should also understand that there are laws. The electoral law is clear about stipulations and punishments for vote buying. If we can actually implement those laws that guide issue around vote buying, why do we need to impact or suffer the entire 200 million Nigerians because we want to fight vote buying? And at the moment, unfortunately, there are gaps even in the implementation of those policies. Despite we're saying this, there are still politicians that still have access to this cash, like you said. So Nigerians would see immediate gratification on election day. If I have access to 1,000 that I couldn't have access to a few weeks ago, why wouldn't I vote for the person that is giving me that money? And again, people say a hungry person, someone that's affected by economic hardship, would not make informed decision in the polls.
Okay, so we're going to continue just right after this break, because I'm going to ask you questions about deployment. Of course, we know that the voters are not going to be the problem, you know, but INEC also is going to be deploying and would need cash as well. But however, viewers will be back after this break.
This is Trust TV, documenting the Nigerian story.
Nígbà PDP ọ̀dọ́ rí ṣẹ́ṣe oúnjẹ rẹpẹtẹ ayé wa dára nígbàlẹ̀ bá dé ló bá dojúrú ojoojúmọ́ ṣá la Nàìjíríà ní Nàìjíríà ilẹ̀ ọlọ́ràá ló bá dahoro ẹ jẹ́ ká gbà padà ẹ jẹ́ ká gbà padà ẹ jẹ́ ká gbà padà. Àtìkù ti dé Okowa ti dé ìmọ́lẹ̀ ti dé òkùnkùn paradà. No experiment, save joy. Only experience, save joy. Foreign investment, save joy. Recover Nigeria, save joy. Save joy.
Vote the safe choice to recover Nigeria.
PDP. Power to the people.
Ìkéde yìí wá láti ọ̀dọ̀ PDP Presidential Campaign Council.
This is Trust TV, documenting the Nigerian story.
Ina kake dan Najeriya? Baka da labarin Jagaba Ahmad Bola Tinubu a yanzu shike gaba kan gaba a cikin 'yan takara a ƙasa Najeriya dake da sassanin asalin sanin makaman mulki da kuma samun da waraka ga rayuwar al'ummar Najeriya. Jagaba shike da sassanin asalin sanin hanyoyin tattalin arzikin ƙasa a Najeriya. Jagaba Bola Ahmad Tinubu magabata suka ce shi a ƙwararren direban da zai ceto rayuwar al'ummar Najeriya a shekara ta 2023. Ya batun dawo da martabar ilimi, noma, kiwo da batun tsaro a Najeriya. Ya game da samarwa matasa ayyukan yi maganin fatara da zaman kashe wando. Haka ina ga batun daidaito a tsakanin kabilu da mabiya addinai daban-daban a ƙasa Najeriya. Nan ma magabata suka ce Jagaba shi ke kan gaba. To yanzu dan masani ina mafita hanya tsani domin a barje a baya? Amsar dai ita ce Jagaba Bola Ahmad Tinubu shine kan kat cikin dubun dubatan 'yan takara a Najeriya da ke neman shugabancin ƙasa daga kanshi sai dai ka sha wafa.
Wannan sako ne daga sashen tsare-tsare da sadarwa na kwamitin yakin neman zaben shugaban ƙasa na jam'iyyar APC.
This is Trust TV, documenting the Nigerian story.
Welcome back. You're watching Daybreak on Trust TV. So still on the conversation, I have Moshood Issa here with me. So Moshood, I was asking the question about deployment of ad hoc staff as well as election materials on election day. Now we are seeing situations where INEC on its part has come out to say, look, we don't have this money as well. And it's going to be a nightmare, you know, deploying ad hoc staff because they need physical cash to transit from one location to the various polling units, you know, that they have been deployed to. So doesn't this even add to the complexities of the situations that we are seeing as it is?
Interestingly, I see this in a very different way.
Okay.
We've introduced a lot of innovations to our elections, including technology. So why don't we do, and the bulk of our logistics that we'll be deploying is not just sending 2 or 3 buses to locations. We're deploying to 176,000 polling units. So I think substantially, I don't expect that the commission will need all the raw cash in this world to be able to deploy to these locations. It's about working with certain group of people. It might be an individual person that you consult or an individual organization that work with these buses or taxis that would need you to transport materials. If you are to work with cash for 176,000 polling units, how much cash will you need? But again, on the flip side, I knew they had some meeting with the CBN governor the other time, a few days ago. And the CBN governor had reiterated that the commission would get every kind of financial support they need. But at this point in time, even we, as an organization who deploy observers to, say, 1,500 polling units, we don't deal with raw cash. We just do electronic transfers,
Okay,
which
good.
is, I think, better than trying to have all the raw cash here and there.
So I was going to ask that question because time and time again I've been part of the election process, you know, from polling units to even the collation centers. And one thing you cannot take away from the election is the need for the presence of physical cash, even if it is not for voter inducement. But then again, as an INEC ad hoc staff, you will eat now. You know, you need to eat. You need to transport yourself. You will take bike. It might cost you 100 naira. It might cost you 50 naira. You can't pay with POS or do transfers. What if these people say they don't have, you know, they don't have the means to collect these transfers, instant payments, and the likes of that? But you need to be somewhere, the polling unit on election day, to start the accreditation and voting process by 8 a.m. Njoku, how do we now address these challenges if at the end of the day, the CBN is unable to make cash available to INEC to discharge its responsibilities?
I don't think we should be dwelling on that. The CBN governor had a meeting with INEC chairman. INEC has expressed their concerns as regards this issue, and they've been assured that they will be provided with cash. And when you're dealing with logistics as such as moving the INEC materials, of course they need cash because they have to buy fuel. You don't want them to start telling you stories that will not affect the election. So it's important, if what they need to get the job done is cash, don't start preaching to them why electronic means is better than cash. Provide the cash for them. So we don't have polls opening by 11 a.m. on election day because they are giving you reasons that there is no fuel. And factly, they need cash to buy fuel. Have you not been to some fuel stations in Abuja, in the capital city, capital of Nigeria, where they will tell you that their POS is not working? You have to go and look for cash. It happens, I've been to at least 3 fuel stations in the past 2 weeks where I had to buy fuel with cash because their POS are not working. So do you want to leave a situation where across the country in rural communities where a lot of fuel stations don't have POS?
Okay.
You don't want to frustrate the process. So let INEC be given all the cash they need for this special engagement that they have to deliver.
Okay, Moshood, the two of you have talked about that meeting with the central bank governor. He said something quite instructive, and that they had approached them much earlier preparatory to this election to say they will need certain foreign exchange because of the foreign components of the items they needed, and that they met that demand 100%. 8 days to the election, do we have any reason to worry that their Naira demands will not be met? And this is coming on the heels of the concerns that were expressed by the FCT REC, which is an important position, which, if you like, can be assumed to be speaking for the Commission. 8 days to the election, is there a reason, you know, to begin to fear that they will not get as much cash as they would require?
So I think at this point in time, we have to be optimistic, but cautiously. We should be cautiously optimistic around the preparation of the commission for this election, especially regarding knowing that this commission does not exist in isolation. We are talking about INEC need cash. Probably police also needs cash. So this institution don't work in isolation. And it's good that all these institutions are also government-owned institutions, and they have regular meetings. There is the Interagency Consultative Committee on Election Security that contains other agencies within there. So I believe they're having consistent meeting, raising their concerns and seeing how to rectify this. So I think we should be cautiously optimistic, but we should not underestimate our challenges and overestimate our capacity going into these elections.
Emmanuel, beside INEC raising the alarm, we have seen governors begin to make statements that suggest that there is something playing beneath the surface that we may not be completely privy to. Ganduje is saying the president is trying to truncate democracy. And there are comments around a certain military governor that has been put in the waiting for an interim government and what have you. And we have also listened to the comments of the Kaduna State governor. With the attitude of this governor, do we have any reason to worry that, because there is no smoke without fire, that there could be something, you know, from somewhere that could just come up and sort of truncate this transition?
You know, for me, if there is any group of people who are truncating democracy in Nigeria, I would say it's the governors. And I will say that for this reason. You are aware that the bill constitutional reform on the local government autonomy has been completely killed, and this happened through the governors of all the states. The local government is the nearest government to the people, and this is partly the reason why our democracy is not working, because everybody is looking at the state governor and the president. Meanwhile, you should be looking at the local government. If the local governments don't have the autonomy and the legislative, the state legislatures don't have financial autonomy, so who is the one truncating democracy? You know, one of the gaps I see in this policy of CBN, and I think is a failure on the part of CBN, is before they pushed out this policy, I don't think they completely considered the part of sensitization and awareness and taking control of the narrative. You know that you are putting out, we know how the state primaries and primary elections in all the political parties happen across the states, and how the governors controls and the role of cash in this process. Now, CBN is putting a policy that was going to check these people, and you didn't control the narrative. You now left the governors and the people who this policy will affect, who have direct communication with the locals, to take charge of the narrative. Where is National Orientation Agency in all of this conversation? Where is NBC in all of this conversation? I would think that every 15 minutes on all our radios and all our TVs, that there will be a lot of conversation around the need and how this policy is supposed to work. That was totally absent. I've not seen one single jingle or advert from National Orientation Agency. And this is about changing the people's culture. We have a culture of cash, and you are changing it. And there's a vehicle, National Orientation Agency, that is in the whole 704 local government, that is supposed to engage through media, through banners, through posters, through billboards across the country, so you will control, so people will even understand what people. A lot of people don't watch TV. How many people actually can afford cable TV? How many people who are rural locals have power? The ones that have power, how many of them stay at home by this time to watch TV? This is luxury. They are all out on the street. So it is on the roads, on the billboards, the radio, that they are supposed to be engaged. CBN missed that part. I feel that NBC, which is Nigerian Broadcasting Company, should have given a directive to all media houses to engage on the radio, on TV, on newsprint, on billboards, so that Nigerians will even understand. So the whole thing, they missed it, and they now left the same politicians who see themselves as the victims, who feel vulnerable, to now control the narrative. And that is why you see the protests happening across the state. And when I see the protests sometimes, Nigeria is a special country. When I see the protests and see some of the people doing the protests, I mean, you look at the individuals and you know clearly that these are people that do not even come to bank year in, year out. But all of a sudden in the country, everybody now needs to withdraw over 20,000 Naira across the counter and over the board. So this is a gap that I feel we missed. Also, the CBN, I feel, missed an opportunity when they introduced this policy. You know, this policy, when they introduced it, it was not going through the ATMs. It was withdrawing over the counter, and there was no check. And I think that went on for about 1 month to 6 weeks. By the time CBN woke up to now start monitoring it, the money was no longer available. These are the gaps that we've missed. So I feel, as we move to the election, I would expect, and I think the president said it yesterday on that live, that he has directed the CBN to go on a sensitization campaign or so. I would expect that by today, that there should be jingles all over the place. Let people be aware and understand the reason. Because this policy, and I said this, let me say this, and I said this going back to 2015, and from what the president said, that in 2015, that the volume of cash that was outside the bank was 1.4 trillion, and by 2022, it had grown to 3.23 trillion. You know, so not to sound in any way political, but I think we should also give credit to the former administration of Goodluck Jonathan. Now you ask yourself, if 1.4 trillion was, why did it move to 3.2 trillion? I want to believe that the BVN policy of the last government is even the reason why a lot of people stopped going to the bank and started moving their monies to keep their monies in their homes outside the system, so they can't track the money. So I've never been a fan of President Buhari, frankly speaking, because in my opinion, he has not been doing well. But as regards electoral reform with the Electoral Act 2022 that he signed, yeah, kudos to him. And this very policy that the CBN has put out, President Buhari came into power riding on the promises that he will give us, that he will fix insecurity, that he will tackle corruption, and he will fix the economy. To me, in my opinion, irrespective of the challenges, that the teething problems of this policy, I believe that this is one policy typically that will tackle corruption, that will help our economy, and that will also fix insecurity. They've been shooting and fighting and throwing guns around. cut the source of their money, and these guys will become frustrated, and this insecurity will be tackled, because even the criminals, as they are seeing the situation. So you kidnap an individual now and tell them to bring 20 million naira. You know it's not possible. You know you won't see the money. So this is one policy that will bring the kind of progress that a country needs. But however, the issues and the gaps needs to be fixed as we go into this election.
So I have this one now. A couple of days ago, Abdullahi Yamadi, our correspondent in Katsina State, visited some communities that have been ravaged by bandit attacks. He was in Safana, he was in Kankara, and he was in Batari, as well as other communities and local governments. Now, he spoke to the people there, and feel as they have it that there's a likelihood that they won't be seeing any electoral official on election day, let alone election going on there, because of the nature, you know, of the precariousness of the security situation there. Now, interestingly, 10 minutes after he left the location, according to him, the community was attacked by 30 AK-47 wielding bandits. 10 minutes after he left. Putting this into perspective, because this is the reality that these people face every day, would you now say that elections would hold across all polling units, local governments, across the 176,000 polling units in the country, like INEC is saying? Is it feasible? Is it possible?
No, but the commission had just recently released an information that election will not hold in about, I think, 240 polling units.
That does not have,
because that do not have registered voters. And the reason why they do not have registered voters is because potential voters did not transfer their registration to those locations, partly due to insecurity in those locations. I remember the commission had expanded access to polling units. We used to have 120,000 polling units and 56,000 voting points. All the voting points were converted into substantial polling units. But again, some of them were relocated to new locations. And then citizens, either due to lack of enough information about this entire process, could not transfer their registration to these new locations, partly due to the fact that they are not aware, or due to the issue around insecurity. And then before now, there are a lot of locations that the commission would have promised, oh, there will be elections. And we wouldn't see election happening there. A typical example is in 2019 Kogi, Bayelsa. In Bayelsa, 24% of polling units in southern Ijo did not see election.
Wow.
We could confirm that because we sent observer there and election did not happen and results were returned. So there are riverine areas that in the process of approaching those riverine areas, those electoral materials are hijacked. And then for some reason, results will be returned.
So, Njoku, how do we now address these issues? Because here it is, insecurity, the lack of election items getting to the locations that they ought to get to. These are problems that are real, physical, and we might still see play out on election day. What do we do?
Yeah, I was going to jump into this. You know, so you see what he said about those places where elections don't hold, but the bigger problem is that results
find their way back
returned. You know, and that's the beauty of this 2022 Electoral Act, and that's partly what we are going to be observing and be looking out for, especially with regards to the beavers, transmission of results, and then also transmission of a number of people accredited in polling units. So you don't return votes where people didn't turn out to do biometric accreditation. Now, talking about the insecurity and the state of the country in Nigeria, there is no way election will hold in the 176,606 polling units. It's not possible. That will not happen. But however, even the Electoral Act envisaged that this is possible and has stipulated how it will happen. And that's why Electoral Act has said that if on election day, there are parts or areas in the country due to insecurity that election cannot hold there, the election will go, I think it's section 24, I'm not a lawyer, I think 24. The election will go on across the country, but the election will be postponed in those places where because of insecurity the election cannot hold. And if at the end of the election, the margin of lead from the person leading and the number of registered voters in those places, the margin of lead is way ahead than the total number of people that have not voted, that those places, election will not hold there, because even if all of them vote for a particular political party, it will still not affect or have any effect on the... And we saw this in Anambra. when this governorship election in November 2021, late 2021, election did not hold in Ihiala. But at the end of the polls, by the time they looked at the margin of lead and number of registered people in Ihiala, it was obvious that the number of registered voters in Ihiala was more than the margin of lead. INEC had to go back there to conduct election. So we cannot say, and INEC should not in any way say because of pockets of insecurity across the country that the election will not hold, or because of attacks on INEC. So in 2019, within January, February, and even March, before the governorship election in 2019, before the election, there were over 64 attacks on INEC facilities and personnel. That was in 2019. The election held. INEC did not postpone the election because of insecurity. They postponed it because of logistic challenges. It was in 2015 that they postponed the election because of insecurity. So now in 2023, as we are, leading from 2022 till date, the whole of 2022 till now, I think the attacks on INEC and facilities doesn't mean that the attacks are right, but I'm just putting them, comparing to 2019. There has been about 28 attacks on INEC facilities from 2022 till now. Meanwhile, in 2019, just January, February already, there were 64 attacks on INEC and elections held. So I do not think that there is a reason why this election should not hold. If there are places because of insecurity that the coordinator code the election will not hold, INEC will have to do the general election and then mobilize heavy security and go back to those places and be able to conclude the election.
Okay, Moshood. You mobilized people to Ekiti and Osun State in the off-seasons elections, and there we had the opportunity to test run the beavers, and we saw how the new Electoral Act sort of played out in what appears like a microcosm of the larger Nigerian society. What were the lessons from this off-season election, that pitfalls that you think we can avoid in the general elections, and what did you see in those two elections that sort of signpost a positive development for the general elections?
Yeah, the fact that we were able to pilot the bimodal voter accreditation system and it worked substantially, it's actually a good lesson taken into the 2023 election. But the fact that we know that technology is not a silver bullet that tackles all our problems, it means there are also gaps around that. And one of those lessons we also learn is around the fact that people that transferred their registration to another location and for some reason still had PVCs for both the previous locations and the new locations. One of the lessons we learned that in some situation, they were able to vote in the two polling units, unfortunately. These are some of the gaps we need to actually
invariably
bridge.
You're saying after doing a transfer, before they issued you the transfer voter, they should have demanded.
The law says you should return the old one.
For some reason, they did not retrieve, because we went back, we had a post-election engagement with the state-based CSOs there, and this is part of the feedback we got from them. And then there's another lesson is that the beavers, for some reason, could be bypassed due to connivance between either political parties and the electoral official.
Bypass in what form exactly?
A voter could approach the presiding officer, all in the name of accreditation. Only the presiding officer at that point could know if that person was authenticated. Either his fingerprint official was authenticated. We only see the process go through. It could go through, it might not go through. But at that point, the presiding officer could use his discretion and just issue a ballot paper to the person. Because it is only the presiding officer at that point in time would see if that person is being verified.
So are you saying the voter is not allowed to request to know, for instance, whether that authentication has succeeded or not?
The voter could request, if you notice, the mission of the voter is just to get there and get his ballot paper and go and vote. Only the presiding officer will tell you, oh, we could not authenticate you, you cannot vote.
Okay, so by extension, we should have had something similar to what we get at the pay points of, let's say, shopping mall, where as they punch in the information around your purchase, there is also a screen that you are looking at, that corroborates whatever they are seeing on their screen to then suggest that whatever they tell you, it's right. So are you saying we should have had some sort of system that allows you to know that
if you are authenticated is successful or not? Because part of the feedback we got from the tribunal in Osun was the fact that in a location where it's a stronghold of a particular political party, the beavers was bypassed because of due to connivance between the electoral official and the agents at that point in time. So probably some ghost voters came in with PVCs that's probably not theirs. And then, because it's in the power of the presiding officer to decide if the authenticator was successful or not. And at that point in time, he could decide to just issue a ballot paper, whether the authentication was successful or not.
So what is the use of the agents of the party?
Again, like I said, it is presumed that that location is a stronghold of a particular political party. At least that's what the court was presuming at that point in time. And because some of those locations, we later realized that we had observers in some of those locations. But then at some point, those observers, not all observers would have their eyes on the beavers machine at that point in time. These are some gaps, meaning the beavers is not a silver bullet. Despite the fact that it's a new innovation that had improved our electoral process, at some point we've seen that it could be bypassed. And then at the end, you'd see the number of votes cast is more than the number of accredited voters. But then, you know, the whole calculation is usually done by the number of vote cast and the number of registered voters in the entire polling unit.
Thank you very much, Moshood. So, Njoko, I know you want to respond to some of what he has said, but then there's also this issue that has been bothering me. So yes, the voters card, according to the 2022 Electoral Act, is mandatory to be presented at polling units, you know, when you want to cast your vote. However, INEC has also alluded to the fact that we have the largest voter register in Africa, you know, getting to 100 million.
94 million, no?
94 or thereabouts strong. But then again, across the different wards and PVC collection points, we've heard of thousands of PVCs just sitting there and collecting dust because people are not motivated to collect their PVCs. However, the beavers machine has a database of all registered polling units across the country, which means that if someone should approach the polling unit and a fingerprint is taken or probably a photograph is taken, there is every chance that he is going to be accredited if he registered, you know, he did the voter registration. Now the challenge, don't you think we should be moving towards the use of valid means of identification rather than relying solely upon the PVCs, because people have been demotivated for the longest of times. The queues are long, the scorching sun is there, as well as other factors. I mean, we see what played out because of the Naira scarcity itself. People have complained of going to polling units to get their PVCs because they don't have transport. So going forward, do you think this is something that should be looked at least by the Commission, to ensure that more people are given opportunity to exercise their franchise?
You asked about 5 questions.
Yes, that's exactly. I'm trying to run against time.
So first of all, the law, I think Section 47, insists that for you to vote, that you must come to the polling unit with you must present yourself with your permanent voter's card. So for the purpose of sensitization, it is important to put it out there that you have to be at the polling unit of PVC before you are allowed to vote. Yes. Now, we observed the election in Kenya, and we've seen how election happens in some other parts of the world. I've observed the election in US, in Angola. In these places, you know, there's nothing like a voter's card. You know, I know we're in a meeting where I brought out my voter's card in US, and the head of election for the state was, "What is this for?" He was surprised. I mean, he said our system is so complex. Yeah, we are complex here. Now, what they do, and what I think we should do. And because election is a process that we must continue to reform. And that is why we're observing this election, to see how much the Electoral Act is, how much INEC will adhere to the stipulations of the Electoral Act. That way we'll see the gaps and see the challenges, and then we'll come back to the table for another reform of the Electoral Act, you know. So in other climes, like in Kenya, that did election August last year, what we observed is that at the point of you coming to register to vote, that all you need to present is the number on your whatever ID card you are presenting. So in the case of Nigeria, if what you are bringing is just indeed a valid ID card, if it is your international passport, they will take your number. If it is your national ID card, they take your number. If it's your driver's license. So on election day, that is all you need to present. and they confirm with what is on. You know, they use the same beavers, but they call it Kim kits. They present, when you present it, they confirm that what you have is what's on the system, and you'll be issued. Okay. So in that way, people don't need to really, you know, insist on beavers. Then, part of the third question you asked.
We need to wrap up quickly.
Part of the question you asked is, and this is also an opportunity to appeal to INEC. There are averaging 94 million registered voters in our voter register, but they are not going to turn out to vote. What we are asking INEC to do is INEC should release, since collection of PVC has since ended, INEC needs to release the disaggregated data of all the PVCs collected. That way we'll be able to check, we'll have a check, and some of the things they talked about here will not happen, because if there are 50 PVCs collected from this polling unit, you can't give us result of 90 because there are 100 people registered in that polling unit.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Njoku, and thank you very much, Mr. Moshood, for granting us this quite interesting and engaging discussions, and we hope to have you again to continue with the discussion some other times.